Okay, people, I'm back again. Now I know, some of you thought, oh, it's turkey season. No way he's filming. Wrong! Nothing stops me. So, what is it this week? This week is a special turkey treat. That's right, Fellowship of the Ring by Tolkien himself. Yeah, buddy. I know, it's just a mass. I don't mind these mass produced editions, to be honest. But I have this one, right, obviously. Boom. I know it's got a bit of an issue here. But look at the cover though. Look at that bad boy. I think this one's from like 80 something, right? And boom, with his own art on the front, right? I got that bad boy. I think this was from like 60 something. Let me see. 70? 60? 70? 73. No, he's on the back. I know we only covered books, but come on now. You know I got it on DVD, mind you, not Blu-ray yet. Not yet. It's glorious. Had to get all the extended features, of course. You don't think I read the Silmarillion twice and didn't get the extended features, now did you? If you thought that, you were wrong. This bad boy's tremendous. I love how he makes all his extra footage appendices. Let me move all this crap. I'm going to be banging this one around, though, because, let's be honest, it's the one of the least worth. Mind you, it has Frodo on the cover. It can't be that bad, right? Let's get into it. Cost and availability. Bro, it's everywhere. It doesn't matter what it costs, buy it, because it's tremendous. Right? I bet you could find it at like $5. Let's be honest. 4, 5. You can find them at Goodwill for 1 or 2. So tremendous. Rating. No surprise here. This one's a 5 out of 5. This one's perfect for everyone, right? If you love to read, you probably already read it. If you haven't read it, go read it right now. 100% worth your time, even if it's not your style, even if it's not your genre. And if you have some of those weirdo normies who don't like to read, they can read it and enjoy it. It's that good. It's not heavy, right? Now, let's say when I was little, when I was a kid, there are songs in here. I just skipped the songs. It doesn't kill it. Even kids, adults, everyone, all the time, everywhere. It's almost perfect, right? Almost perfect. As close as you can get. So good. All right, so it's a 5 out of 5. Not many of those. It's a turkey treat. Now, obviously, there's a lot of videos on the interwebs on Lord of the Rings. You can go find them. I've watched them. You'll probably watch them. Why not? More the merrier. I'm not going to go over every little bit. I could make, like 9 videos on that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go mostly in sequential order, and I might spoil a lot of the crap in the book. So if you haven't read it, again, you know what? If you haven't read it, do us all a favor. Go read it, then come back, and then tell everyone in the comments what you thought about your first reading, because that's fun for Tolkien fans too. Okay, so we start off, and it starts. Oh my God. There's a preface. I don't read that. I didn't need to read concerning hobbits. I didn't read it the first time I read this either. I go right into books. Now, right in before page 1, we got 2 things I'm going to cover. First, I don't know if y'all can see that. Yeah, it shows up. Yeah. We got ourselves a map. I love maps in books. Oh my god. I have one on Lyndon Johnson. It shows Texas. I live in Texas. I start freaking out. Just maps add a little something. Maps always add something for me. I love it. And I think for me, because I'm not in my mind, like if you give me some kind of a direction in a book, even in this one, even when I'm reading it, I don't really place things spatially very well. In my mind, I don't do that. You know? East over the hills. I'm like, I kind of see some hills. There's mountains, but in my head, I don't know that I've placed them in the right spots. I don't follow people down valleys, this kind of thing. So when I get a map, it helps me orientate, right? I'll go back to it often, almost whenever they mention a place, I go and I hunt the map down. But on top of that, this shows you something about Tolkien himself, not just that he put a map, but what it covers, right? You have a lot of books, even, let's say, biographies, actual world history. Everyone wants to get to the main show sooner rather than later, right? If someone became Napoleon's chef, we want to start when he met Napoleon. That's the action. What Tolkien does is he can grab a small section and make it the big point, right? So, that chef had a life all of his own before he met Napoleon, right? And minus Napoleon, it has its own rise and fall as a story would go. Interesting moments. You know, he went on dates with ladies. He blew up a cake one time. Whatever the little thing is, in his world, for his life, same with us, the day-to-day matters as well. And so here we have a map when we're going to be talking about Mordor and wars and all this heavy myth is the east farthing, the west farthing, north and south farthing. Like, it matters. And it does. In the very first half of the book, that's all we were concerned with is hobbits and their little shire and their little area. But without any of the other bits coming into it, it expands it out, right? This is what he's good at. He's good at taking these little bits. I think later in the other books there's a certain battle, and for our characters it just happened, but for the people there it's a whole ordeal, right? It's their battle of the Bulge, right? He keeps track of all these things as he goes too. It's subtle. It sometimes it might not mean much. But then when you look at it on the whole, each of the little parts build into this great world. And this is partially why. And another thing, before we leave here, I don't know if you can see this. See how it says Book 1? Structurally, we're talking now, as an actual writer, Tolkien. This is something more writers should be aware of. Like I was saying about let's say this make-believe chef for Napoleon. Each story has its rise and fall, its arc, right? The rise and fall, the crescendo for his early life doesn't matter once you compare it, once you put him next to his time with Napoleon. That overshadows this, right? Let's say But if you're an author and you delineate it for yourself and for the reader, then they know Book 1 will have its arc. Book 2 will have its arc. It may crescendo, it may hit with more, percussion, more trombones, louder brass. The other one maybe should be small woodwind instruments, right? They're musics that might not mesh as a whole narrative, but they are part of one person's whole story. So without the delineation, your levels are off, right? They have to be. I only have this to communicate with me from you, the author. So you have the commas, the spaces in between paragraphs, chapters, chapter names. That's your responsibility to structure this thing in a way that I see a stadium and not a building, not a skyscraper, not an airport, right? So if you leave things out of the structure, then I'm putting them together as a whole, and as a whole, they might not work. The end may be truncated. You know, this middle part may meander. These kind of things. So if you don't focus it, you've messed up, not the reader. And here, Tolkien doesn't mess up. Obviously, it's a 5 out of 5 book. I wish more books did this. I think it could help you as a writer as well, if you're out there and you want to be a writer, to focus on what you're sort of talking about. But as readers as well, we should be demanding this from writers. If they're not good enough, we should, tell them or not buy, or tell other people not to buy. I know it sounds harsh, but if we're not the standard, who is, right? What, the next generation is going to get nothing but garbage? That's not right. It's not right at all. Also, we deserve it, right? We as readers deserve good books, so we should be critical when they're not good. Okay. What else? Bilbo. Gotta stop flopping this book around, bro. Where's my pen? Making a mess with his book. Bilbo. Bilbo leaves Bag End for the last time with a song, right? And there are music all throughout this book, songs. And if you just read, they're just sort of singing. And there's an underlying current there, right? And you feel it. If you don't know, and this is your first time reading, you certainly will feel that there's some reason he's having these songs, right? You're not sure what it is. It's part of why, the not sure is part of why people want to reread it. They're trying to figure out what he's doing here. What he's doing is linking his story to all of his lore, right? It's sort of it's a motivator. It's not a motive, it's like a current, right? There are different currents in the ocean, so to speak. It's not making me swim that way, but it's affecting my swimming, right? He has in Silmarillion, the whole of everything is made in song, right? So establishment, song. That's voice, that's sounds, words, oaths. All of these matter in Lord of the Rings. So, Bilbo, finishing with this song, leaving the ring with this song, is like let's say some magic on it, right? And it's not stated, which is also fun. So you don't know for sure what's what, but it's like, let's say in Greek mythology, when you draw the gods to you, right? You call them out, and sometimes they show up, and it's going to affect your life. It's a subtle way of drawing the gods in on this event, these events that are going to happen. And you see it more as you go on in the book. But I like that he doesn't forget his own lore. All the little bits have to matter if you've mentioned them, because I'm going to keep track of them as a reader. You see? Another point. I'm just go point by point here. Again, it's not every little bit in the book. There's a lot of book there. Another thing this does well that other books don't. And by other books, I'm talking about Game of Thrones. Talking about, what's the stupid? Wheel of Time. 3 years pass. 3 years pass from when that party happens to when Gandalf comes back. And then they finally do the last test that says, this is the Ring of Power. It's one sentence maybe that says it. But it's there. And if you're not paying attention, it doesn't hurt the book. But if you are paying attention, it will add to your enjoyment. Like, why? It's real life. It gives the world space It gives it distance. It also makes things fit better. What do I mean? If you do Lord of the Rings, the same story, in modern times, certain elements start to not work, other elements start to work better, right? Like magic affects modern more than not modern people because they, let's say, they're more able to believe in magic, right? But distance affects not modern people way more than modern. I could get on a plane, fly right to Mordor, dump a ring off. See? Now that story element changes. The reality of the world that you're in, or you're putting your characters in, affects the story. In some way, it can't not. Now, it sounds simple, but if you aren't tracking it in your head, if you don't understand distance by horse, distance by walking, you can't move an army fast, fast enough or too fast. Your characters get to where they're going too soon. And the reader picks up on this. The reader will know this doesn't feel right. Something's not happening the way it should. Right? And an astute reader will go, can't move an army that fast. You can't walk that fast on foot over uneven terrain without roads. This sort of thing. And every little negative chips away at ye old verisimilitude, at that thing that lets you release reality and invest in whatever story you're reading. And he doesn't miss these beats like other books do. Every bit, he understands how long it takes to move from one place to the next, to hunt Gollum down in the wilderness, to drag him back by foot to the elves, to go from there and question. All the little elements matter. And that time it's taking you, or Gandalf, to figure out what's happening and then get to where he needs to be to affect it, is also time that the enemy, Sauron, has had, driving 100% towards his objective. Right? So we start to, as readers, feel this time crunch, which, again, is not something they normally bring up in these non-modern stories. When you see like these sword and shield shows, right? These old Hercules, Xena, this kind of a story, they tend to forget about this. They want action. Modern audiences want it now. But the timing mattered. And what's weird, and I noticed this more as I'm reading other books, obviously, where you'll read about, what is it, the 1600s? I think it's 1700s, one of these, where like a William Marlborough's making war with France. And they have a war season, the summer months. And then they just go, y'all go to winter quarters. And where they are, the army literally hunkers down there. Which sucks for those guys. They got to spend a winter out there. But then for me, I'm thinking, hold on. Is this taking like 7 years? And they're like, yeah. Every year, Marlborough comes from Britain back to France to try and make a war for 5 months. Then he stops in this town, shuts his people in, then goes back to England, and we do it year after year after year. Maybe a battle or two in between. I'm like, that's a long time. That's a long time to dedicate to sort of an issue. But then we read it as modern readers, and it's, I'm like, that's how you get a 30 years war. And after the war's over, there's this teeter-totter of history, and new things happen, and old people go away, this sort of thing. But it affects that real life. So if you're trying to write a story of people like that, right? These people don't have cars, no phones, they don't have gunpowder. I can put an age around that and imagine. And they don't have to have our rules, but some kind of rule has to exist, right? They don't fly. A sword can only swing so far. An arm can only swing on a sword so many times, shoot an arrow so many times. You have to go grab more arrows, this sort of thing. These rules still apply. If you lose those rules, again, you've taken me, the reader, out of your book. It's not my fault. What is this word? No, that's another point. That's a past point. I'm not going to mention. Rings of Power. I feel like I bring this up all the time, but I'm going to bring it up again because it's my point, and I'm obsessed with it. We always do this. The 3 elven rings, which evil never touched. Just never touched. And I'm like, okay, let's think about this. Because they say the dwarven rings are all corrupt. And that they're all destroyed anyway. And I'm like, one, dwarves can be shady about their business, right? They don't mind letting you believe a lie, even if they're not going to lie to you, which some of them might lie about it. Like, do you have that ring? And he'd be like, well, no, I don't have it. I know where it is, but I don't have it, right? Dwarves do this mess, right? So I think dwarves would not tell the truth about it. Also, if we're talking about blacksmithing, forging rings of power, do we think elves would be better at that or dwarves? Now I know that we know, because even they admit, that Sauron, in a form that was pretty to them, helped them learn how to make the rings of power. But then he didn't touch theirs. So I'm thinking, what if he went to them in a disguise they like, made rings of power, then went to dwarves in a disguise they like, and helped them make rings of power, then went to men and did the same thing. Right? I don't think the elves made all the rings of power. They made a bunch of rings of power. It says in the book there are lots of rings of power. Not all of them are the great rings, so to speak. So the elves made these 3, and clearly a bunch of others. I'm thinking there's a good chance that he didn't touch the dwarven ones either. And a good chance that elves are maybe misremembering on purpose that he, messed with the elven rings. I'm just saying. And I think we all agree the men were easy to trick, right? You get some black Numenorians, I'm going to give you massive power. They were like, sign me up, bro. The dopey Numenorians were easy to trick. We won't get that twisted. We're not twisted about that. But I also think the dwarves still have rings of power. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't think theirs become useless. I got no proof. But it's up here, bro. Right? It's in the ye old noggin. Let's talk about Frodo, right? This is another element he likes in his book, and this is, I think, sort of British, right? It's a British element. Other cultures don't do this. There's a simple heroism in Frodo. The ring comes to him. It's clearly a big bad thing. It's his. He owns it. So he can do what he wants with it. And if he's like, this is bad, and he chucks it in a river, in the river is where it goes. Right? It's his ring. But what it's not is his problem. This is the elves' problem, right? They're the ones who built their kingdoms on dirty rings of power. That if Sauron gets the ring, he'd take their kingdom, right? The after effects would affect the hobbits, obviously. But it's not their problem. Elves should have probably dealt with this better. Elves are the ones that let Sauron get away, right? Elves are the ones that worked with them to make rings of power to begin with. It's also, and probably more, Aragorn's problem. He's the king, right? He could have just said, this ain't my ring. I'll take it and I'll give it to the king and let him do what he wants with it. I don't care. Right? But Frodo, with with not as much to gain and not as much responsibility in the issue, sees the problem, just takes it. He's like, there's a mess, I'll clean it up. Not even, I'm not going to ask for kingdoms. I'm not asking for gold, titles, or land. You know, he could have like, okay, I'll take the ring, but you got to give me the Shire. I'll own it all myself. I'm king of the Shire. Legitimately, he could have asked for that. Doesn't ask for anything. Doing his duty. It's there. It's a problem, and I will fix it if I can. And I like that. We don't have to always have overblown, sort of braggadocious heroism. You don't always have to jump on a grenade, right? The sacrifices are many here. It's tons of time, risk of life. You know, his home is no longer the same. He could have stayed home and defended the Shire. Probably would have been better that he did for the Shire, right? But that's not what he chose to do. That's why it's heroic. I love it. Another thing about the time. Okay, so he knows he has the ring that the big evil guy wants. He knows Gollum told the big evil guy, Baggins, Shire. It's going to lead him right to his doorstep. He knows these things. And here's this fool. I'm going to take like 3 months to get my affairs in order before I mosey on out of town. Ugh. Not a lot's happening, right? He's writing letters, he's selling property, he's buying property, he's looking around, he's moving his stuff to his new house, this kind of thing. But it makes it so stressful. Like, as a reader, you're like, bro, can you just get on a horse and just go or something? Can we just not be here? Can you just grab a bunch of food and go? It's like, I'm taking my time on my... This is usually the part of the movie where you take too much time and then the evil villain catches you, right? Which is what almost happens, but it's such simple things happening, and it still feels so stressful. I love it. Oh yeah. Now Frodo does this like 9 times. I think there's like 6 or 7 songs they sing. But as they're just walking through the woods, they sing. I think they sing Bilbo's song. They sing a few songs they know from Bilbo, amongst other songs, just happily singing as they mosey along. And then they'll sing a song, then almost get caught by a black rider, right? Or they'll sing a song, almost get caught, and then like meet some elves randomly, right? And I think it's you see this mantra, right? Almost these way of calling the gods almost to help them inadvertently, right? What is it? It's showing yourself to them as worthy. You know, through your voice, they goes up to them and they send this help. It's subtle, but it is also there. And what else is there is oh, hold on. Again, Gildor, ye old elf, says, elves seldom give unguarded advice, for advice is a dangerous gift. You see? Words. The words an elf uses, like if you do this, this might happen. That's putting something out into the ether of Middle-earth. And if you don't know exactly what you're doing, those words can come back to haunt you as the one who gave them. This is why the elves are hesitant. They've lived long enough to see these bad things happen. Because verbiage, words, oaths carry this magical weight in Middle-earth. And he doesn't forget it even in conversation with people, right? Even the conversations matter. They go into the Old Forest, that's what they call it. Now, again, if you read the Silmarillion, do some of these other researches, you'll know it's a stinking old forest, like super old. Like maybe amongst the oldest in the whole world. But what's happening here, what I like, why I mention it, is it's showing powers that are above our particular story, Frodo. Even this issue with the rings. There's stuff that is above and beyond it, outside of its bounds. And Frodo is sent help from some of these outside forces in the form of, well, what is it? The starlight on him, randomly meeting elves, Tom Bombadil, even the forest itself, the Burrow Downs. All of these things are forces at play in this war, in this 1,000-year-long war that Frodo's just sort of the end of. And it's fun to see these moments come in, and if you step back from the story to see how they are pushing our hero along sort of inadvertently. He's just sort of hanging on to the ring and trying to choose as best he can. And when he's sort of wrong, the forces are there to try and help that wrong work in his favor, right? So it's not predestination, and it's also not them forcing it. It's help. It's just this constant help. Like, if you try your best, you will succeed kind of thing. It gives you hope that things can work out. Even if you don't realize it's happening, you feel the hope inside as a reader. This part, when I first read it as a kid, the Burrow Rights, the Burrow Downs, always kind of was trippy to me. I didn't get what exactly was happening. But I was young, and so I'm like, get me more to some action, so I just moseyed on through it. I didn't let it stop me. But again, in subsequent readings, you see the depth that's happening here. These Burrow Rights are good and bad spirits from the wars against the Witch King, I don't know, like 700 years before in Arnor. Arnor being top half of the kingdom versus Gondor, the bottom half. And they say, Bombadil says it in some spot, I think, where he's like, some of these scare people away. They're just, I'm this spirit, I can't affect the world anymore, but I don't want the other spirits to win. I think there are spirits of men as well. Yeah. So you're like, I know my cousin sucked. I'm not going to let him run things. So there's still the war continues. And in some spots, they're evil spirits. These are the ones that almost got our boys. Cut their heads off or whatever. And they use song, an incantation, so to speak, to put their magic on the hobbits to, kill them, capture them. And of course, they're saved by Tom Bombadil. It all works out. But it's this depth of story that you're walking through history almost. A living history, so to speak. It's very fun. You know what else gets my mind going? After they each pick a weapon, he gives them all a weapon of the men of the West, Westernesse, I think it says it. Westernese? I don't know how to say it. The men of the West. The Númenóreans came. They were the men of the West. They started doing their own stuff. He gives them all a weapon from there, and he keeps like a brooch for Goldberry. Always get Goldberry nice things. It's a rule. And then he gets the rest and just leaves it on the hill, just to shine in the light for the rain or whatever to affect. Now, some of them are going to, I suppose, rot away. Some animals might drag off. But I'm always wondering, because he says they're there for anyone to take. And that's how the burrow, the hill, will lose its strength. And so I'm imagining in times to come, random young men and women, adventurous types, will wander upon these weapons forged in the ancient past with some strength to them, and carry out whatever purpose they have, for good or bad. Now, I'm always interested in how those stories would end up, right? What happens with those? And in your head, you can always be like, one of these might even end up like being Excalibur or something. It's kind of cool. Leads me to another point, though. More time to crap on Wheel of Time and Game of Thrones. The lineage is what gives that sword its name, so to speak, right? Bilbo calls it Sting. it had a name before that, and Bilbo owning Sting, then Frodo using it, then Samwise Gamgee using it, and fighting Shelob adds to the myth of this blade, right? You don't just give a dumb kid a sword and call it Needle. That's stupid. It's detrimental to your story. Now, let's say even in real life, right? Let's say Hemingway bought this pencil, right? And wrote a book with it. His actions now make this random store-bought pencil more than a randomly store-bought pencil, right? That's how the person, the actions imbue it, right? So you can say, or you should say, this was your great-great-grandmother's sword, and she called it Needle. And I'm like, oh, why? Well, because when she was little, she picked up this piece of iron and stabbed a bear with it. And the blacksmith whose son she saved hammered it into a sword for her. You know, just make something up, bro. It's your story. You can do what you want. Don't be lazy, though. Don't just... What ends up happening is people try to take shortcuts to legendary blade, right? Wheel of Time does this with some kind of, like, crystal sword or some crap. Ugh. So annoying. Strider. Remember when the first time I read this book, again I was little, they called the character Strider, and I liked that name. And later they're like, well, he's actually called Aragorn. But I'm pretentious, so I'm like, nah, every time I see Aragorn, I'm going to just call him Strider anyway. And I'm going to just glaze over what's happening. That's what I did. I did it so much that by the end of the book, when they're like, oh yeah, Strider's the king, and Samwise is flipped out, I'm as flipped out about it as he was. I'm like, wait a minute. He's actually the king? I thought he was just a ranger. I went that hard in the paint. Hilarious. Book two? Frodo wakes up and there's Gandalf. Now, I gotta say, nothing makes you feel better as a reader than any time Gandalf shows up. You're like, oh my god, everything's gonna work out. Gandalf's here. I feel it right in my jellies. You're scared at night. Like, you know, if Gandalf showed up in my room, you wouldn't be freaked out that like a 6-foot-tall wizard's in your room? I mean, no, it's Gandalf. I'm like, bro, the storm's gonna pass. Gandalf's here. It's such a character, so good. It's such a ease to your burdens, so to speak. He meets Gloin of the dwarves who went with Bilbo in The Hobbit, right? Now, the moment you do, when you meet a character from another book, and now the two merge, you know, the shared universe like the MCU, I can never get enough of this. When Law and Order does like a spin-off episode with, you know, some dumb Chicago Fire or whatever the crap it is, I'm always there for that mess, bro. Every time. I love it, because you're like, bro, every season of that links with this, and your mind just runs off. When DeForest Kelley shows up, when Bones shows up in episode 1 of Next Generation, love it. And this gives me those feels, right? This is a whole extended universe, even though I know it's all together. It just feels different when you put a book down and then the next book grabs elements from it. The Council. This as a writing element is genius. One, it's hard. If you read any book, just sit down and think, how many people are talking at the same time? How many people are in this room? It's usually 2, maybe 3. Tolkien gives you like 9 characters in one space, all just sort of talking around each other, and that you track it in your mind. It's stellar, right? But what he also does with this council is, let's say, real life, 9 different things happen in 8 different spots to these other different people. That equals, you know, a bank heist, an electing of a president, the start of a world war, right? All these sort of non-connected things in history line up to equal the one big thing. Not a problem until you try and explain what those things are, right? I have to tell you 9 different things so you can understand why World War II started. History does this. It's rare that one person can be at every event everywhere that causes all the chains to move, right? So now, how do I tell this? How do I get this across to the reader without giving 15 different mini stories that they have to just read through randomly and leave characters all by the wayside, right? Well, what he does is a council. And each person talks, and some new light on this story of these writers and this ring comes to the forefront. And it's Gimli is talking about Balin and Moria and all the dwarven issues, and in amongst that we see, oh right, here's the ring, here's the shadow, here's Sauron. Men do the same, elves do the same. Until we then, by listening to all the stories, have this deep understanding of this complex issues that's happening around the world. Right? So it moves me through complex story efficiently. Because I don't lose track of who's talking, ever for an instant. And they're all saying something I'm interested in, both for lore and for my current story, right? For the ring, for the shadow. It's like 9 different reasons to like this thing. They set out, they're on the road, they see, there's one chapter, paragraph specifically where Gimli is just naming off mountains. I love it. But at one point he says, Caradhras was called cruel long years ago when rumor of Sauron had not been heard in these lands. A few things here. One, when he does dialogue, it's subtle, it's hard to explain, but there are certain choice words he has that makes a character seem older or more wise. Frodo and the hobbits have sort of a younger word choice, let's say. Not children, though. And each of them, on top of that, will sound like sort of themselves. I've seen a lot of books where once they start talking, I can almost feel like this is one person talking, acting like 3 different people. Not even very well acting. It's like the same voices coming at me, even though it's supposed to be different characters. And in Tolkien does not do that. He's able to keep track of these minor little tweaks in word choice to give everyone individuality as well as their ages. And also, this is another one of these where you see the elements above the issue of the story, right? Our ring is happening here. Irrespective of what happens to this ring, the mountain will still be there. Caradhras will still be the crew. I was mean before, I'll be mean after. And your little petty wars and all the things you think will end the world don't mean anything to me. And there's good and there's bad of that, right? I believe the Watcher in the Water as well is this entity that lives outside the bounds of our story, so to speak. Sauron didn't make them. They were there to begin with. Gives the story and the world depth. Love it. Speaking of the Watcher, when we get to Moria, before we get in, there used to be a stream there, right? The streams, the lands, all these have sort of a power, magical element to them. One of the gods specifically likes the water. So what the evil does is they try and hamper water, right? There's not a lot of water flowing around Mordor. He doesn't want that god in his area. So when the orcs take Moria, they dam up the river, and it backs up and it makes the big pool where the Watcher is. And I'm assuming somehow that process led it so this guy could float out of Moria and up. Right? He lived under the mountain. I think the mountain and these beasts are having their own sort of war. But it being above, right? It's not subject to. That's why the water looks so dirty to me. That's why it's corrupted. Because the Watcher itself is in it, corrupting the water. I can bring this force to bear of my own volition. I'm the Watcher. Shelob does the same, right? They bring forces to bear. And those forces can exist in his lore, right? Because if you didn't establish your higher lore, then this would upset your story. He didn't upset his own story. We find Balin's tomb. It wasn't long ago I met Gloin. So in my head, all the dwarves from my old adventure are happy, yucking it up. Here's dead Balin. Now I'm sad, right? It's this twinge of sadness in me. But Tolkien uses this death as well, because it shows notes that he's allowed to hit, right? Which he then hits later on the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. One of the most iconic scenes in any literature. I'll say it. Old Gandalf standing there holding the line. I like how Aragorn and Boromir hold their ground. The men, they show more guts than the dwarf or the elf, to be honest. More actual bravery. They were going to sit and fight the thing. I don't know what they planned to do. I don't know if they even had a shield. Dude's made of fire. But they're going to go, they're like, bro, I'll stick you. They're going to go get it. They couldn't because the hobbits were there. But when Gandalf drops, not going to lie, I teared up. Didn't know what to do after that. Alright. Khaled Zaram. This is another element that Tolkien does extremely well in this book, which I love, which makes it worth rereading over and over. A lot of authors can get where they love their character too much. I've seen this, and they don't let them die when they typically would in the story that they built. Or they over-harp on certain things, right? Like the author's just as sad as the reader that Gandalf died and then doesn't get off of it, right? He overdoes it. Here, Tolkien shows like the world continues. Gandalf or no Gandalf, the ball will keep moving. And so he takes them, the dwarf especially, because I'm like, what is the Gimli, like 180 years old? He's seen dudes die before. He knows how to be sad without it just being a mopey, mushy mess. So he's like, I am sad right now. My boy's down. I'm not happy. But it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing to see this pool of water where my whole people started. And I'm going to go look at it with my eyes, even sad. And that's what he does. But it's very important to do. We have Celeborn. That's how you're supposed to say it, by the way. Celeborn. And Galadriel. Here, Tolkien does something a lot of books do not do. He empowers a female character without, let's say, depowering the male counterpart or her male counterpart. You don't need to show men being idiots to show a woman coming in and fixing it all, to show her strength, right? He's able to walk this line perfectly. And that's for a guy who doesn't have, quote, a lot of female characters in his book. He gives me one of the greatest female characters. Very subtle. We also have the Mirror of Galadriel, which I like as a contrast to other magics in the world. Feanor captured light of some kind. He shoved it in the Silmarils, right? It's a very forceful way to do it. He made the Palantirs, they're unbreakable. And they can mess with your head, right? This forceful thing. Celebrimbor made the Rings of Power. I'm going to force this metal into a thing and then use it to force my thing on other things, right? There's a force to, let's say, male crafting, male magic, so to speak. Galadriel, female now, merges the two. It's a stand for the water. You had to make that. You had to make the thing that carries the water. But it uses a natural element. It's this blend of the two. And in blending, she can tell it what to show you, and it'll show you what she tells it, but it'll also show you other stuff outside of her control. And outside of any control, you might learn the most letting it do what it wants, right? So you can almost see like the feminine use of magic here, where it blends more, it's more malleable, but there's this other strength that comes with it, right? This knowledge that you get by, paying attention or however you want to look at that. A lot of ways to look at it. But that you see this delineation, this difference in how one would do magic versus the other and the ramifications of that. And he just sits it right in there, just shows it to you. Doesn't have to explain it, doesn't take the time. And I think we're about done. Oh, Boromir. I put Boromir down. I put poor Boromir down. That's all I got to say about Boromir. Bless his heart. Okay. Add time. See how long this is. I was blabbing away, people. Alright, add time. Y'all know the drill. Y'all can go buy that book of mine. I'll do the other ones later. Obviously, I'm going to do all of them. They're fun to read in the winter, aren't they? Didn't you get that sense? Now, some of that may be because that's when the movie came out. But I feel like even before the movie, I would read these books around when it got cold. I feel like you get into it more. Because they're always walking around in the wilderness. You can get into the story just that little bit better when you read it in the wintertime. Which is what I do. I'm at some point I have the audiobook as well. Read by one Andy Serkis. I'm going to review that. I haven't read audiobooks enough. Right? To know. Like when I read a book, I know right how it goes. I can feel it in my jellies. I know how I've taken it. I know the points I'm supposed to be getting out of it from what the writer said. Very experienced reader, let's say. But audiobooks, I'm not. I don't. So it's still too new for me to do any kind of... Like, I've never reread an audiobook, right? And I haven't listened to them enough. I only used to read books. Physically read them, mind you. So I will do the audiobook later, but it is very good, too. If you were inclined, right? Like, it's your first time you never read the book, I wouldn't be scared to recommend Andy Serkis ones to you. They're that good. Even as a mega fan of Lord of the Rings, you can read that as your first time. You won't miss anything. Now, if you're a mega fan of Lord of the Rings and you haven't listened to Andy Serkis, go get those bad boys, bro. It's like the joy you had rewatching the movie for the first time, right? It's so good. All right, I got to edit this in between massive mouthfuls of turkey or other such yum yums. All right,